Well, welcome everybody to the Montana Arts Council's Get the Grant, applying to the Montana Arts Council's Artists in Schools and Communities program webinar. We're very glad that you joined us today. I want to welcome our Montana teacher leaders in the arts who are joining us today to learn about our grant program, all of our potential applicants who are joining us on the webinar or on the phone, and artists who are joining us too to learn about this grant program.
Enter your participant, followed by pound.
Hold on.
Just press pound.
Okay.
Got it.
We're going to mute. We got it? Okay. My name is Emily Coring. If you don't know me, I'm the Director of Arts Education at the Montana Arts Council. And also joining me on the line today is Kristen Hahn-Burgoyne, who's our Grants Director and Accessibility Coordinator. And Kristen's going to give us a few housekeeping details about our webinar before we dive into our content.
Yes. So as we get going on this, everyone will be on mute. And I'll handle that. If you need to, down in the bottom screen under Manage Participants, you can unmute yourselves. But we recommend you use the chat feature, which is also down there. It's a little thought bubble. And you can just click for everyone and do a share. Oh. Hold on, Emily, I gotta mute you. There we go. I only like to hear myself talk. So if you have any questions or concerns about things, please put them into the chat bar and we will get your questions as you put them in there. I'll keep track of them and I'll let Emily know that there are questions and she can answer them for you. The slide deck will be available at the end. There'll be contact information. Please email us to get that slides.
Yes, and we'll be happy to send them to you. And we will stop at least once in the middle of the PowerPoint to take questions, and also at the end. We're planned to go for an hour, but we're also happy to stay on the line with anyone who wants to ask us more in-depth questions about their application at the end too. So with that, we will begin. So the Montana Arts Council, for any of you who don't know, is the agency of state government. We are established to develop the creative potential of all Montanans, advance education, spur economic vibrancy, and revitalize communities through involvement in the arts. And towards that purpose, we offer the Artists in Schools and Communities grant program with the purpose of providing access to high quality arts education by putting artists into schools and communities that may have trouble accessing through their own resources, professional teaching artists and arts organizations. So this year the AISC program provided $118,000 in grants to 26 arts learning projects across the state. In addition, the AISC program also provides a registry of qualified teaching artists to schools and communities, and also provides professional development in arts learning to teachers and teaching artists across the state. Last year, we hosted our first Montana Teaching Artists Weekend that was attended by 40 teaching artists around the state. And we are about to launch our revamped and revised Artists in Schools and Communities Artist Registry, which we'll give you a peek of today too during this webinar. So for those of you who are new completely to grant writing, we want to give you the good news first. The idea of writing a grant can be daunting to a lot of people, but we want you to know that you don't have to be an expert to write this grant. And here is a list of people who write AISC grant proposals. A lot of teachers write them, principals, PTO presidents, board members of organizations, artists, and often the parent who volunteered in a moment of weakness, guilt, or insanity. This grant is designed to be written by people who don't have a lot of grant writing experience. Sometimes it's written by a professional grant writer, but we've worked really hard to make this application accessible to people who aren't experts at the development game. And we also work hard to provide the best possible support for people so we can get you to the point where your grant can get funded. And there's more good news as I just said, the MAC staff is here to help you. So here's the list of people who are eligible to receive technical assistance and draft reviews of grant proposals from MAC staff. Everybody who calls us, we are happy to help with an application. That's not always true. Some private foundations and funders can be impossible to access and impossible to find your way in to find someone to help you. That's not true. We're a state agency. Our funds are taxpayer funds, and it's our job to assist you. And we're happy to do that, except with the one caveat: we don't want you to wait till the last minute. We do need you to do a little planning ahead, and we will discuss how that should operate for you. So here's what we're going to cover today during this webinar, and also give you the opportunity to ask lots of questions. Project planning, how to collaborate with a teaching artist, using our online grant management system, which fortunately is very user-friendly, that's why we chose it. Writing your grant narrative, building a budget that works for your project, which is where a lot of people get tripped up, and we'll have some tips for you. And our top tips for getting your funding. Hopefully our top tips too will also help you in the process of not just writing this grant, but writing other grants too. We have a lot of grant programs, so we have a little bit of expertise in what works and what doesn't work when you're writing a grant. The only thing you have to do to get help from us today and after this webinar is pick up the phone and call us or email us. So a few important definitions before we start. For the purposes of this grant program, there's two definitions you need to know, which is sponsor and artist. The sponsor, when we talk about the sponsor, we're talking about the organization that's applying for Artists in Schools and Communities funding, and it has to be an organization. Individual artists cannot apply for this grant. The sponsor applies for the funding to bring in a professional artist who they will name in their grant application. So the artist is the professional. The sponsor is bringing in to provide the arts learning for the funded project. And when we say professional, we mean it's a person who has experience both as a working artist and has experience as an educator in the classroom. The artist can be an individual teaching artist, they might be a group of artists, or they might be an arts education organization too. MAC provides the funding for the projects to the sponsor organization, and again, the sponsor contracts with the artist and pays the artist directly. Sponsors in this program are almost always either schools. Any K-12 public school in the state of Montana is eligible to apply. 501c3 nonprofit organizations that can be an arts organization or a social service agency, or organizations that are operating under the umbrella of a university. And an example of that would be Montana Shakespeare in the Parks, which operates under the umbrella of Montana State University, but is eligible for funding in this category. So now that we've talked about the definition and the difference between a sponsor and the artist, we're going to talk a little bit about project planning. Because before you even open up that application and start to answer the questions, the first thing you need to do is plan your project. Because as a wise person in our office often says, failing to plan is planning not to get funded. So the first thing you should do is read the guidelines. And if you get a copy of this PowerPoint presentation, the guidelines are embedded here. But the guidelines are also found on our website on the Artists in Schools and Communities page. They're a downloadable PDF. So you should read the guidelines, pause, go get a cup of coffee, and then read them again. Because almost everything you need to know about the grant is contained in the guidelines. Then you'll want to determine if your organization is eligible, meaning are you a school, a 501c3 organization, or under the umbrella of a university? And then the third and most important question you'll want to ask yourself is, does your project meet our primary criteria? Sometimes the criteria for grants can be quite complex. The criteria for funding in this grant program is very simple, and it's that participants learn the fundamental skills and knowledge of an art form through hands-on participatory learning. So in our guidelines, when you read them, you'll want to pay special attention to the "We do not fund" section of the guidelines, which is in the table of contents, because we do not fund in this category performances or exhibitions without accompanying hands-on activities, lectures, or without accompanying hands-on participatory learning, and we do not fund lectures or demonstrations. So in short, if students are not making or doing art, we are not funding it. And it's not because we don't believe that the act of seeing a performance or visiting an exhibition is valuable. It's really that our funds are extremely limited, and we want to put our funding into the students building skills and knowledge through doing art. So planning your project, we have a couple of very important questions we want you to answer for yourself before you start writing that grant. And they're big questions. Here's number one. What do you want your group of learners to know and be able to do in an artistic discipline at the end of your project? These are two examples from funded Artists in Schools and Communities applications. These two answers that you can read yourselves clearly tell us what the students will be learning in the specific art form. We truly believe in the power of arts learning to promote goals in social and emotional learning, community building, or learning in other subject areas, but the primary purpose of funding in this category is to build skills and knowledge in an art form. So you'll want to very clearly define in your project, what is it specifically that you want students to know and do? If it's a visual arts project, what kind of visual arts are they doing? What specific skills are you building? If it's a theater project, again, what specific skills are you building in theater? What do you want them to know at the end of the project that they didn't know when they started? That leads to literacy in that art form. Big question number two. Who is the best available artist or arts organization to deliver the skills and knowledge to your community? Now, for all of our grantees, you have two choices. One is that you know an artist already that you want to work with, and you'll start collaborating with them immediately to plan this project. Your artist can be local to your community, but they can also be an artist that you bring in from another part of the state, or even from out of state, because we will fund out-of-state artists. On some occasions, and there is space in the budget for you to request travel funds for your artist. Your second choice is that you don't know an artist, you have an idea of a project you want to do, and you need to find an artist, but you can use Max Artists in Schools and Communities Registry as a starting point. Now, our AISC registry is going through an overhaul, and if you go to our current website, you'll see the old registry, which is still valid, and all those artists you are still welcome to contact. But we're going to give you a preview, and I need to switch screens very quickly, of our brand new AISC registry, which is ready to go, but our website is not ready, so it's not up yet. But this is what it's going to look like when it's ready. And I think it's really pretty. You'll be able to sort by these categories by clicking on these dots. And then as you scroll down, you'll see a very short description written by the artist, a short statement about what they do, and then their contact information with a link to their own personal website in many cases, so that you can have a look at their website to see more about what they do as an artist and as a teacher. So this is almost ready. Hopefully within the next couple weeks, this is going to be up on our website. Isn't that a beautiful picture? So stay tuned for our new AISC artist registry. It's been a long time coming. I'm going to switch back to our PowerPoint.
Emily, there have been a couple of questions that have come in while you've been talking about choosing an artist. The first question is, can the artist be a school group? For instance, if my band were to be invited to another district to do a combined activity with another group, would that be acceptable?
Unfortunately, not in this category. This category supports professional artists working in schools with student learners. So it wouldn't support student learners working with other student learners.
And can the artist be a member of the sponsor organization?
Yes, the artist can be a member of the sponsor organization. As long as we have this, for example, we fund A Voice, which is the 501c3 organization started by David Spear, who's a photographer who lives in Pablo, and he works, we fund his program at Tweed River School. He is the artist, but he operates under the umbrella of his own 501c3 organization, which we fund. So we're not funding David directly, we're funding his nonprofit organization. Should I keep going? Kristen?
Yes.
Okay, good. All right, question number 3. How will your group of learners in your community benefit from this project? In other words, why does your project matter? Answering this question for yourself is going to help you write a compelling story in your narrative that captures the panelists' attention. Why should your project be funded over all the other projects? This is where your passion can come through about your project. And your passion and the story you tell and your narrative is often what will get you the grant. So why are you passionate about making this project happen? And what would be the consequences for your school or community of not receiving funding for this project? So that's something you should answer for yourself before you start writing your grant.
Emily,
Mm-hmm.
does there need to be a contract with the artist before an application is made?
No, but there will need to be one after you get the grant, yes. You should, in the grant application, there is what's called a signature page that you and the sponsor and the artist sign that's an agreement that you have collaborated on the project and you both agree on the terms of the project. But it's not in a formal contract yet. It just says that the sponsor didn't submit this grant without the artist's knowledge, basically. After the project is funded, then we do ask that the sponsor and the artist do a contract. So big question number 4, what resources do you already have for the project and what resources do you lack? It's important to make this list for yourself, not to discourage yourself from writing a grant, but this will help you when you build your budget. Consider your needs. And things to consider are your artists and how much they'll need to be paid, support personnel, and especially if you're doing a project in a school or in an after-school program, it's important to have that support personnel with the artist in the room. And in fact, during the school day, it's the law. Space, equipment, art supplies, transportation, and time. And don't underestimate the importance of time as a resource, because you have to ask yourself the question before you submit, do you have the time to appropriately plan and execute the project the way you envision it? And as teachers know, time is in short supply, especially in school communities. And then your last big question, what will success look like? Okay. Once you have your vision of success formed, you might be ready to start your grant. And one thing about success too, it's important to note that success might be in the process. It's not always in a polished product at the end. For example, a couple of AISC grants we funded, one has been the women's prison in Eastern Montana, their guitar program. Because it's a women's prison setting, we don't have a big performance at the end, but it's really about the process of the women being able to experience and play music. And that is success. That's their definition of success. It's not a big, huge concert at the end, which is not possible in their setting. We also fund Good Grief Camp, where we bring in the Drum Brothers to do music and drumming lessons for young people who are processing the loss of a loved one. Again, it's a therapeutic setting. It's not about the performance at the end. They're learning musical skills as a way to process their grief. So define what your success looks like. That's not always a fancy exhibition or a big show at the end, especially when you're working with young learners. Okay, I want to talk a little bit more about working with your artist. It's very important before you write your grant, not just for the sake of your grant, but for the sake of your project, to talk to your artist and then talk to them some more. Here are some things the sponsor and the artist have to agree on in advance. Your goals for the project, where the project's going to take place, because it's essential that, you know, if it's outside the area where the artist lives, they have to be able to get there. The schedule of the project, we have guidelines for how much we would like the artist to work and how much we feel it's fair for an artist to work in a day. We say 4 sessions of no more than an hour with each core group of learners per day is a maximum. It really is the artist's discretion, but that's a good guideline for schools and communities so the artist doesn't get overworked. Asking them to do 6 or 7 sessions a day we feel is unreasonable, and it should be agreed upon in advance. How the project will be assessed or evaluated, the artist should be part of that conversation. The artist's fee should absolutely be settled before the grant is written. And what are the expectations for the end of the project? Will there be a student exhibition of work? Will there be some kind of formal or informal performance for parents or friends, or not? And then most important, how will the artist and sponsor regularly communicate? And it's important to establish that communication system, whether it's by email, by regular phone calls, or in-person visits if possible. Because it's all about relationships, relationships, relationships. And the relationship you build with the artists you engage will make or break your project. In this program, we certainly do have artists who have worked in the same venue, be it a school or community organization, for year after year because they've invested that time in building the relationship with the sponsor. The first day of your project should not be the first time you meet the artist. If you invest time in the planning process, it's going to benefit your grant application, but really it's going to benefit your learners. And that's the goal of this program. So we're going to just pause briefly. Kristen, are there any questions at this point, or does anyone have a question before we tackle the application?
There is a question about, does the artist have to be one on the AISC list?
That's a great question, and the answer is no. The artist does not have to be on the AISC registry, but we do ask that the artist be a professional working artist with some experience in the classroom, and the way that you will prove that if they're not on our AISC registry is by submitting their resume or biography and work samples. It's not required if they're on our registry because they're already vetted by the Montana Arts Council. But if they're an artist, and we have many artists we regularly work with who are not on the registry for one reason or the other, but you do have to submit their materials. And please ask them, because a couple times the assumption's been made that they're on the registry and they're not. And then the grant is submitted without their resume materials and their work samples, and we have to send it back. So confirm with your artist whether they're on our registry or not. Good question.
And another question is, how far in advance should I contact the artist, and how much time do we need to spend together?
That's a really good question too. You know, it's never too early to start talking about a project with an artist you're interested in working with. I can tell you that we always open our grant process in January with an April deadline. So my advice would be, as as soon as our process opens, you start talking about the project you want to do. So you have plenty of time to get that application in and plan appropriately for it. As far as how much time to spend with the artist, you know, it kind of depends on the depth and breadth of your project. Certainly, if you're bringing an artist into your school just for a short experience that lasts just a couple of days, which is certainly something we fund. We fund projects that are 1 to 4 hours or 5 or more. If it's just 1 to 4 hours, I'd still encourage you to meet the artist and have some good conversation with them, but a couple good phone calls will probably do it. If you're planning on bringing your artist into your school, you know, once a week for a year, the whole school year, which we also fund that too, that takes a lot more relationship building. They need to meet the school staff they're going to work with. They need to talk with all the teachers. They need to find out what's going on in the school curriculum. To me, that requires probably putting together a small planning committee and having several meetings to get to know that artist and what the expectations are. Okay, here's the application. We have an online grant management system called Foundant.
I do have one more question, Emily.
Oh, okay. Go ahead.
And the question concerns, what if the organization is thinking of working with multiple artists? And I'm assuming that's multiple artists, maybe multiple short residencies, if that's...
You can put an application together. I'll give you one example of when that has happened. For example, we're funding this year the Holter Museum of Art, and they put together a couple of artists under a theme, basically, so that it kind of tied, the theme tied what each separate artist was going to do together under an umbrella, and that worked for them well. You can do that if you want to bring in, you just have to remember, you know, the maximum ask for this grant is $10,000. So you don't want to ask for too many artists. You're not going to be able to pay that many artists within the limitations of this funding, if that makes sense. But it's not unprecedented for organizations to do that. So Foundant is our online grant management system. The link to the online grant is on our AISC page of our website. It's easy to access. But if you've never logged on before, what you'll want to do first is create a new account where that arrow is right there. And when you click on that, it will go to this page where you'll be asked to enter your organization's information as well as your contact information if you are the person applying for the grant and you're going to be the project director, essentially. You will need to know what your tax ID is. All schools and 501c3 organizations have one. If you don't know what it is because you're a classroom teacher and you have no idea, ask your school office. They should have it for you. If you're in a nonprofit organization, you can ask your finance people. They'll know what your tax ID number is. You will also need a DUNS number. Our money comes from the National Endowment for the Arts for this program, so it's federal money. And if we're distributing federal funds, we're required to ask each organization to register a DUNS number. If you're a school that receives federal funds, you have one. If you're a nonprofit organization that receives federal funds, you have one. If you don't have one, what you can do is call Kristen or email Kristen and she'll help you figure out what your DUNS number is. It doesn't cost any money to get a DUNS number and it's not really complicated, but it is required. And once you have it, you'll never have to worry about it again.
Emily, we do have a question going back to the artist. What is the maximum dollar value you can pay a single artist through this grant?
That's a good question. I thought I covered that, but I might have skipped it.
Yeah, and there is a follow-up to that it looks like it's $900 for 20 hours, if you want to address that.
It's $45. Well, here's the thing. We have a suggested guideline for paying artists, but the artist fee is to be negotiated between the sponsor and the artist. Our suggestion is that you pay them $45 per contact hour with students. You are welcome to pay them more, absolutely. And I would not discourage you paying them more. I personally, in my opinion, feel that 55 or 60 at this time in the year 2016 is more appropriate, or even more in some cases if it's a master teaching artist. 45 is getting a little low right now, and we may need to look at that. But you do want to be careful. We have had applications rejected because the grant panel felt, especially in requesting out-of-state artists, that the fee was too high. So, you know, you need to talk with your artist about what their fee is and decide if you feel that that's reasonable. And if you have a question about the fee they're asking for, you can always call us and run it by us and say, how does that feel to us? Because we work with a lot of artists and we can give you our opinion. So, but there's no requirement. So, and in fact, if they say, well, I'll take $35 an hour and you agree to that, we don't encourage that, but it's between the sponsor and the artist. This is the application status page or your dashboard, and your dashboard will come up every time you log in. If you have not started an application yet, what you'll need to do is click apply, where that arrow is pointing downward, to get to our application page that lists all of our open applications. And this is where you're going to have to make some choices when you start your application. We have currently, under Artists in Schools and Communities, we have 4 choices in applications, which seems complicated, but in fact, almost everyone will choose number 3, which is our regular Artists in Schools and Communities grant for artist residencies and arts learning experiences. Our arts learning and glassblowing grant is a specific one-time legislative appropriation of $25,000 that is to be given to an organization specifically to teach the art of glassblowing. It has a letter of intent that's due on February 29th. If you're on this call because you're interested in the glassblowing money, if you haven't already talked to me, you should probably call me tomorrow and have a conversation with me about that funding. It is very specific, and it's also not for a startup program. You already have to have some facility and ability to execute a glassblowing program before you will be able to access the money. Number 2, Arts Learning Partners. There are 7 organizations in the state of Montana currently that are designated as Arts Learning Partners. They're arts organizations that have a proven record of providing high-quality arts learning to student learners across Montana. There are a few organizations that are soon going to be eligible to join that group. If you're interested in knowing what the criteria is to become an Arts Learning Partner, I would encourage you to contact me and I can talk to you about it. But like I said, most of you will choose Artists in Schools and Communities. If you're a teacher in a K-12 public school and you're applying, if you're a parent or a PTO member who's applying on behalf of your school, or if you're an arts organization that's not an Arts Learning Partner but is doing a project where your teaching artists are going to come in contact with students or lifelong learners in a school or community, that's going to be you. Sometimes people think their project is number 4, which is special projects. Every project is special in its own way, of course, but the Artists in Schools and Communities Special Project category is specifically for projects that do not involve professional teaching artists working directly with learners. For example, projects that provide professional learning to educators, or projects that develop arts education curriculum but not direct instruction to groups of learners. So if you have that kind of project in mind, which we have funded in the past, I would encourage you to call me and have a conversation with me. If you're confused, just call us and ask us. Don't start an application in the wrong category because you will have to start over. We can't transfer it to from one application to another, and that would be sad for you. To start
your a couple of questions.
Oh boy.
And these are things you may be planning to address in the budget section, but I'll just put them out there for you. The question is, what do the maximums table and the guidelines apply to? The $900 for 20 hours. And then, is the match requirement cash only, or can it be in kind, volunteers and equipment? And can you keep all these in your head?
One at a time. $900 is the most we would pay per week to a teaching artist, an individual teaching artist.
And that's funds from?
By our guidelines.
MAC funds.
Likely, yes, unless there was exceptional circumstances where you could convince us this artist needed to be paid more than that.
And the next question is the match requirement cash only, or can it be in kind of volunteers, equipment, etc.?
And I am covering that in the budget, but the answer is this program requires a cash match, and in kind is not allowed in this grant.
And then the final question that's on here is, can funding be applied to help bring in an artist combined with other funding? So can MAC funding be combined with other schools' resources to bring in artists to work with students in the school?
Yes, absolutely. And I think when we get to the budget and the that part of the expense part or the income part of the budget, I'll talk about how you can match MAC's grant with other funding. So when you start your application, once you have filled in any field on the application, even if it's just the name of your project, then by Foundant's guidelines, you have started an application. It will always show up on your dashboard until you're ready to submit. So every time you go to your dashboard, there it will be where it says Best Arts Learning Project Ever Conceived, where that arrow is. That's your application. And then you just need to hit Edit Application, and it will open for you again, and you can pick up where you left off. A couple more definitions, because you'll be asked to choose. In the Artists in Schools and Communities regular category, an arts learning experience is a project in any discipline that lasts from 1 to 4 hours with a core group of learners. An arts learning experience can include a performance or, for example, a visit to a museum exhibition, but it must also include a hands-on participatory experience for the learners. And one example that we currently fund is the Montana Repertory Theater, where they come in and they do their touring production, but then after the production, they come into classrooms and do an hour-long theater workshop for a core group of learners, which is, by our definition, no more than 30 participants, so a classroom of learners. An artist residency is 5 or more hours of hands-on participatory instruction for each core group of participants. So with an artist residency, we're talking about a teaching artist you bring in to stay a while. And that 5 hours could happen all in 1 week. It could be an hour a day for a week of school, or it could be 20 sessions that happen over the course of a school year, or a 9-month period if you're working with adult learners. It's important to know here that our grant panel does not favor one kind of project over another. It funds an equal number of arts learning experiences and artist residencies. We're simply defining the project you're conducting, and that's all. And this is my daughter. So, honey, I'm not done yet.
I just given you a hug.
Thank you. Now you have to go, okay? See you soon. That's my daughter. So here's where you'll choose arts learning experiences or artist residencies. And we have a few pro tips for you. Pro tip number 1, this is very important. Assume the grant panel knows absolutely nothing about your organization, your artist, or your project. We've seen some organizations that have sterling reputations, well earned in Montana, falsely believe that maybe they don't have to give as much information to the grant panel as they need to because everybody knows who they are. They shouldn't assume that, because we have citizen panels. Our citizen panels may or may not know who you are or who your artist is. So give us as much information about the artist, about who you are, and about your project as you can, if you have the opportunity to do so. You can see where it says upload a file on both of these parts of the application. You can upload 5 megabits of data, which is usually enough, but I encourage people to use web links wherever possible, because that will allow you. You can insert a Word document with web links on it that the grant panelists can just click on, and then you could put, you know, as far as additional artist information, if the artist has 5 work samples and they're all web links, you can fit them all instead of trying to upload 5 JPEGs, for example, which you probably wouldn't have room for. So, and if you're having trouble uploading information, ask us. Pro tip number 2, read the directions. You'd be surprised how often, this is our signature page, whereas you can see you have to sign it and date it. And we often have to send this back to the sponsor because they didn't date it, print their name and print their organization's name. This is a legal document and we have to have that. So whoops, they didn't do it. We have to send it back to you. So just make sure you read the directions in the grant. Everything there is spelled out for you. Pro tip number 3, don't use weird programs. We're a state agency, and our state computers only like certain things. They like Microsoft Word documents, they like Excel documents, they like PDF documents, and they like JPEGs. If we can't open it, we'll have to send it back to you. And you do have to upload a couple of documents into this application. If you're working on, you know, say an old Mac computer that doesn't use Microsoft Word and Microsoft Excel, I would encourage you to borrow a friend's computer or go to the library where you can use a Word or Excel document and not send files to us in formats that we may not be able to open. Because especially if it gets down to the wire and it's the last minute and we can't open your budget, that's going to be a problem for you. And please don't send us a JPEG of your budget, because if we have to manipulate your budget, which sometimes we have to do, we want it in Excel so we can help you. If it's in JPEG, we can't help you. Pro tip number 4, Word is your friend. A good thing to do when you're answering your narrative questions is write and edit the answers first in a Word document, and then cut and paste them into your grant interface instead of typing them directly into the grant interface. 1, because you might forget to hit save, or your house might get struck by lightning, or your dog might be running around your desk and pull out your power cord, right? Or because you might use your answers again in other grant applications, and you'll be surprised how often different grants ask the same question or a version of the same question. And instead of having to reinvent the wheel, you can just use the answers you used on your last grant. Now we're going to talk about narrative questions, because that's the bulk of your grant. We asked several narrative questions in this grant application. I think there's 6 now. And your goal is clarity for both of them, clarity of project and clarity of mission. And a very wise person named Kristen Han Burgoyne often says, the long answer is not always the best answer. Our narrative questions will allow up to 10,000 characters, but this by no means you want to use every character. A good guide to grant writing is to tell your best story using as few words as possible. You want to be Hemingway, not Faulkner, is a good guide. However, the danger is also not using enough words that will make your answers vague and confusing. Make sure you are answering the question that is being asked clearly, concisely, and with detail. Even the best grant writers can fall into the trap of not answering the question that's being asked. So that's a really important tip that we have for you. Here's 5 mistakes we found people make in writing their grant narrative. defining vague goals and outcomes, using too little detail when asked for a detailed project description, which is question number 2 and should be your most detailed answer. Number 3 is answering a question that is not being asked. Repeating yourself to fill up the space. Again, you don't have to use 10,000 characters because you can. And number 5, the cardinal sin of allowing spelling and grammar mistakes. The attention you pay to spelling and grammar mistakes tells the panel a lot about how much you want to get funded. This is question number 1 on our narrative, which is your learning objectives. And this is an example from one of our AISC funded grants of a great answer. What do you want the learners to know and be able to do in the proposed art form at the end of the residency? Does that sound familiar? Because I asked you to think about that in your project planning. Note the numbered list. In a grant application, lists and bullet points are your friend. Grant panelists do not like to read dense paragraphs of text when they have to read 30 or more applications. You can read this answer yourself, but clear, concise, and addresses specific learning goals in the artistic discipline. This project was funded last year. I'm going to show you an example of an answer that did not get funded to the same question. I'm just going to give you a second to read. I'm actually going to read that so you can hear how it sounds. 1, to provide students with core values to be implemented during the program and applied throughout their daily life. These values include respect for oneself, other, and the space. Act or say yes, which encourages students to take chances, opening up new possibilities and to find joy in the stage in life. 2, to be introduced to basic theatrical skills. And 3, to learn the educational component of each play. For example, the play that will be used for the 2015-2016 school year will focus on the solar system. Now, they did use numbers, certainly. However, they also had a lot of grammar and spelling mistakes. But more than that, the applicant did not address the question being asked. Remember, the primary criteria for funding this grant is participants learn the fundamental skills and knowledge of an art form through hands-on participatory learning. And they did not address what knowledge students will gain in the art form beyond, quote, basic theatrical skills. They talked about social and emotional skills, which are a benefit of participation in theater. However, that does not fit our criteria for funding. And good advice for any grant you're writing is make sure, always go back to the primary criteria that the grantor is asking for and make sure you are fitting their criteria. This is our primary criteria, so we need you to address that criteria only. Here is a detailed project description. However, this is another unfunded grant because this description has no detail. What it is a list of activities that they'll be doing in the residency, but it's not a clear and concise answer to the question that is being asked about your project description. Notice there's several parts to the question in the project description, and it's very important for you to answer all of them in the question. This is simply a list of activities they'll be doing. And remember, your project description is an opportunity to tell the panelists what will the learners who are participating in the project be doing with the artist, and it's your best chance to describe your vision for the project. And if at the end of reading your answer to number 2, the panelists don't understand what your project is, then that's going to be a problem for your grant application. One of the questions asked, it's number 5, is about minimizing barriers. It's a really important question that our panelists pay a lot of attention to, and it often gets blown. This is an example of a great answer to the question that was written by actually one of our arts learning partners. And one of the reasons that this is a really good answer is because of the detail they use in answering it. Often when we ask How have you created ways to minimize barriers so that a diverse group of people can access this opportunity? Sometimes organizations interpret that as, is your space accessible to people with just physical disabilities? And that's not only what the question is asking. So you have to look carefully at what the question is asking. We have an accessibility coordinator on our staff. It is Kristen. So if you need help with this answer, we would encourage you to talk to her. We also have resources on our website for answering the question about access and minimizing barriers. But it's an important question that we encourage you to spend time on thinking through. The great thing is for teachers, I often find that teachers know how to answer this question. We have a lot of teachers who write this grant. So if you're not sure how to address this question, I would encourage you to talk to a teacher. Here is the question that loses people their grant most often: the assessment of participant learning. Now, I didn't put an example of a good answer in here because there are so many different ways to assess student learning. I didn't want to give you just one example. But I will tell you that our panelists are looking for a thoughtful process to assess student learning. How will you know students have learned what you wanted them to? And you need to spend some time on this answer. You have the opportunity to download an assessment tool you'll use, whether it's a rubric or a post-lesson survey, a checklist. I encourage you to do that. Again, if you don't know how to assess learning, another person to ask is a teacher, because teachers are experts at assessing learning. And there very likely may be a teacher involved in the writing of this grant. We also have resources on our website. You also can call me to ask me. This is probably the question I get asked about the most when people ask for technical assistance, and I'm happy to help you think through how to assess learning in your grant. But do spend time on the answer to this question, because it's your measure, it's where your measure of accountability for your project lies in how you assess your learning. Kristen, do we have any questions that have come in before we go to budget?
No, there aren't any more questions right now, but
Okay.
I'm sure the budget will.
And we are running short on time, so I'm going to whip through this. Okay. In order to access our budget, you have to click and open an Excel spreadsheet that you then need to save to your desktop so that you can upload it to the form. There's two parts to it. Part one is expenses. There are 4 things you can ask for in this grant: artist fees, travel, lodging, and meals for artists, facilities rental, but it cannot be the sponsor's facility. It's in a case where, for some reason, the sponsor's facility won't work for the program and you have to rent other space. And art supplies are specific to the proposed project. One note about travel, lodging, and meals: it will provide it if the artist lives more than 50 miles from the site the project is taking place. State travel rates can be found on our website, and we would like you to use state travel rates as your guide when you're planning what to pay your artist for travel. Part 2 is income, and this is the part that sometimes trips people up. It's a 1-to-1 cash match, which means if your total project budget is $3,000, we will provide up to $1,500 in funding, and you have to come up with the other $1,500 as a cash match. Now, cash can be from many different sources. It can be literally cash your organization has on hand that you're putting toward the project. So here you can see in line 4, I put, this is just a project I made up. Your school's visual arts budget is going to provide $500 toward this project. You can put funding you have actually received. For example, maybe your PTO has said, we'll put $500 toward this project if you get the money from the Montana Arts Council. So you have a PTO grant for $500, and you'll want to list that. And you can also list anticipated funding. For example, you plan to do a fundraiser. I just put in an Art to Remember fundraiser, and you're going to raise $500 from that, you think. It's a very educated guess that you'll raise $500. So there's your $1,500 match to match the $1,500 that the grant from the Montana Arts Council will provide. We will not give you a grant of more than $1,500 if you have a $3,000 budget. It's only up to 50%, a one-to-one match. It can be from admissions and registrations too. For example, if you charge a small fee for participation in an after-school program, you can put that toward your match. If you have a performance at the end, if it's a theater-based project or a dance project and the students perform at the end and you charge parents $3 admission to get in, you can use that as part of your match also. But do detail. Where it says detail, the grant budget will allow you to list what it is, and please use those lines. Often grantees just list $500, $1,000, $500, and we don't know what the source is. The panel needs to know what the source is. If your budget is vague, you're hurting your chance of getting funding. Couple of budget bewares. Your project budget has to balance. When you add up your expenses and you add up your income, or revenue and income are the same word. They must be the same number. That's the reason we most often have to send budgets back to grantees, because the number doesn't match. Your budget must balance. If you can't get your budget to balance, call us. We'll help you figure it out, why it's not balancing and what you can do to fix it. You cannot use federal funds as your match. This would include if you're a school, Department of Ed money, and if you're an arts organization, National Endowment for the Arts funding. It's not legal to match federal funds with federal funds. Use the detail lines, like your narrative, successes in the details. Before you hit submit on your grant, there is a button at the top of your application page that says application packet. It will print it will provide you a PDF copy of your whole application, which you can either email or print out and give to someone. We encourage you to give it to 2 people. Give it to someone who's a better proofreader than you, and then give it to someone who knows nothing about your project. Nothing about it. Because you want to find out if it's clear. So if you're the person you gave it to proofread finds no spelling mistakes and no grammar errors, and if the person you gave it to who knows nothing about your project says, yeah, this makes perfect sense to me, and doesn't have any questions, then submit your application and pat yourself on the back because you did it, and then you can go buy yourself a latte. Congratulations, you submitted your grant. What happens next? MAC staff, which is me generally, and I have an assistant also, reviews your grant application to make sure all the pieces are there before it gets sent to the panel. Relax, because if all the pieces are not there, we will give you a chance to fix it. The only instance we will not give you a chance to fix it is if we deem for some reason that you're ineligible for funding. That very rarely happens because most of our grantees have had a conversation with us at some point before they submit. But if something's wrong with your budget, if you forgot to upload something, or if we can't open something, we will give you the opportunity to fix it before it's sent to the panel. Our AISC grant panel will tentatively meet on Thursday, May 12th to make recommendations for funding. They only make recommendations. They do not decide on funding amounts. That's the job of the Montana Arts Council, who will review the recommendations, and based on available funds, they will approve and ratify grant awards at their meeting, which happens on June 11th, 2016. It's a Saturday. And shortly after that, you will be notified whether you received your grant funding or not. And we contact everybody, whether you received it or not. Your application's reviewed on 4 criteria reflected in the narrative questions: artistic and educational merit, planning, implementation, and evaluation, management and budget, and community involvement and access. The top 2 have more weight than the bottom 2. And our applications are ranked by category on a point scale from highest to lowest. And then based on the amount of funding we have a cutoff point. If you're above the line, you're funded. If you're below the line, you do not get funded. We had $180,000 approximately in applications last year. We funded $117,000 in applications. The panel's not a mystery. The panel is comprised of members of the Arts Council. We have an education subcommittee, so those members, along with arts education experts that we invite from around the state, will make up the committee. This year, we're doing something different. The panel is going to be online entirely, which will be a first for us. So just like this webinar, you'll be able to join us online, and you'll be sent instructions on how to join before the meeting happens. If you choose to join, you will not be able to speak during the meeting or talk to the panelists, but you will be able to hear your application be reviewed, and it can be a really educational experience to listen to the comments on your grant application. And then you can request your written notes after the panel takes place. We're here to help. Like we said before, call or email us your questions. And we strongly encourage a draft review. I will do a draft review and give you feedback on your application. However, you must request this via email to me no later than Monday, March 21st. I can't honor requests made after March 21st. I need to get them on that date or before, so I have time to review all of the drafts that I'm requested to before the April 4th deadline. Our job is to get you to the point where the panel says yes, so use us, but not at 3:30 p.m. on April 4th. So now we have time for questions. I hope a couple of questions before we have to sign off. And we're also happy to stay after for anyone who still wants to chat with us.
We do have a few questions.
Okay.
One is, do you know if the Johnson O'Malley program, which is a Native American funding source, would be allowed to be matched for funds for this grant? Is that something you'd have to research?
Is it federal funding?
You know, I'm not sure. I would have to look.
If it's federal funding, we probably will need to research and find out the answer to that question. If it's not, then you certainly can. Also know that the Office of Public Instruction's Indian Education for All office also has a grant program, and they do take applications for arts learning projects. So it's besides our grant, it's another source of funding too, for projects that have a connection to Indian Education for All. And I think their application is usually available in May. And we'll publicize it too in our Arts Education e-news.
And the other question is, could you talk about the 2-to-1 match for first-time applicants and schools?
Yes. If you are a first-time applicant who's never received MAC funding, or a Class C school, or a small rural school supervised by a county superintendent, then you are eligible for a 2-to-1 match, meaning if your budget is $3,000, we will fund up to $2,000, and you only need to come up with $1,000 instead of $1,500. So in other words, you only have to come up with a third of the match instead of half. So, and if you're not sure, if you're not sure if you're eligible for that, ask us.
Okay, I am going to unmute everyone. Anyone would like to ask questions or talk about your program?